NBA training camp has begun. Most teams have gone through their media day sessions. Preseason kicks off this week. The NBA is back, ladies and gentlemen. And with that, of course, comes all the predictions, projections, and analysis for what we think will occur this NBA season. Who are going to be the contenders? Who are going to be the surprise teams for this year? Who's winning the championship? The MVP award? I mean, hell, sports books thrive off of stuff like this. And what we think is going to happen in this upcoming NBA season and making betting predictions on that. But just like every year, I always like to predict how things are going to shake out in each respective conference, where teams will finish, what their record is going to be. And then, of course, it's always fun to go back and see how wildly wrong I was at the end of the season. I feel that's especially going to be the case in the Eastern Conference this season, as this conference in particular is going to be so incredibly unpredictable as it usually has been in years past, but that will especially be the case given all the injuries to various star players, and of course some of these being unproven teams with the moves that they made in the offseason. But to the best of our ability, based on what we know now heading into training camp, in this video we're going to be breaking down where teams will finish in the Eastern Conference 1 through 15, and I would love to hear where you guys agree or disagree in the comments. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, be sure to hit that sub button, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, as difficult as predicting the Eastern Conference is going to be, the top pick as far as who's going to finish with the number 1 seed to close out the season is pretty easy, and that's the team that finished with the best record in the East last year, and a team that is more or less keeping their roster intact. They won 64 games last season. Their core guys of Mobley, Jared Allen, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, all are in their prime, all coming back healthy. They add Lonzo Ball, who, if he can stay healthy, that's a big come up for them, and someone who is a tenacious defender and a high IQ player. No doubt in my mind, they're finishing atop of the Eastern Conference, barring any major injury to one of their stars. Now, the playoffs, that's a different question. In this video, I'm just predicting the regular season standings. The playoffs is a different story when it comes to how I feel about this team, because I actually don't think the Cavs, despite being clear favorites, will come out of the East this year in the postseason. At number 2, I've got, surprise, surprise, the New York Knicks, although I will say I'm not as sold on this team as some might think. I do question how things are going to go under Mike Brown. I do wonder if all the mileage the Knicks starters have put on the court last year will impact their health this year, and outside of their starters, they don't really have much depth on that roster. So if one or two of those guys goes down, is that going to be enough to keep them at the top of the Eastern Conference? But assuming they stay healthy, I think it's safe to say they will finish second in the East this season. After those first two, though, this is where things start to get a little more challenging and up in the air and how things will shake out. I know most outlets, most fans have the Magic at number 3, but I'm really not sold on that team, who have had one of the worst offenses in the NBA the last 2 years. I don't think Bane is suddenly going to make them a contender, but I'll touch on them in a second. At number 3, and people are probably going to call me crazy for this one, but I've actually got the Detroit Pistons. Look, I don't see the Pistons as title contenders this season, and you would think putting them in the top 3 in the East would otherwise suggest that they are going to be contenders. It's more so because spots 3 through 10 are going to be pretty interchangeable in terms of where things are going to land in the Eastern Conference. But for the Pistons, the way I look at it is this. You're talking about a team that went from being one of the worst in the league to finishing 6th in the conference with 44 wins last year. You saw massive strides from guys like Cade Cunningham, who has blossomed into the star the team had all hoped he would be. Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson made jumps from the previous season, both players who are still in their early 20s and haven't even entered their primes yet. But then more importantly, Jaden Ivey, who was their second leading scorer, is coming back from being out for a good portion of the year, coming back hopefully healthy. Ron Holland will see what the young 19-year-old can do in a sophomore season. So the reason I have the Pistons so high is because you have a young team that really started to blossom, a young team that is only going to get better with time and experience, has the right veteran role players around them. Yes, losing Malik Beasley will hurt, assuming he isn't coming back, but for a team that jumped from being one of the worst in the league to 6th, and now you have their young core coming into their own, and with the expectation that they will continue to get better. With all that, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that the Pistons could finish 3rd in the East. At number 4, this is where I have the Orlando Magic. My perspective on the Magic is we need to see how Desmond Bane fits with this roster. Obviously a massive upgrade from Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He obviously addresses their shooting woes. He's going to help space the floor for Wagner and Banchero, who are more effective in creating their own shot and getting to the paint. Bane should be able to give them better looks, since defenses will be forced to stay on him given he's a three-point threat, whereas last season defenses could easily double Banchero. But in my view, this is a team that has a lot to prove when they've consistently been one of the worst offensive teams in the league, the worst three-point shooting team in the NBA, and then of course the uncertain health of Jalen Suggs, who is a key glue guy for that roster. As talented as Wagner and Banchero are, the team was nowhere nearly as successful as they were when Suggs was on the court. That's why I'm wary of putting the Magic any higher than number 4, which is still pretty good, by the way. This was a team that finished 7th last year at 500. At number 5, call me crazy, but this is where I have the Milwaukee Bucks. They're not going to win the championship. They're not going to make it out of the East. I also wouldn't be surprised if they got knocked in the first round. But when I look at the totality of the Eastern Conference and how wide open it is, as long as Giannis stays healthy and is still with the Bucks, I don't see how you can put the Bucks anything lower than number 5. Really, the only reason I didn't put them higher was because outside of Giannis and to an extent the addition of Miles Turner, I didn't really see anything else to get excited about for this team. Kuzma was a disaster for them last year. Maybe he bounces back a bit now that he has a full offseason and training camp with the team. They have no depth, no young players to really be excited about. I fully expect this will be Giannis's last season with the Bucks, but as long as Giannis is still on that team and they're in a bad Eastern Conference, a 5 seed should easily be achievable for the Bucks. At number 6, now people are really going to think that I'm crazy, but I've got the Boston Celtics. We know the Celtics are effectively taking a gap year. They're not going to be competing for a title. They got rid of 2 of their key veterans in Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis to duck the second apron. But while some Celtics fans believe it is in their best interest for this team to just tank the season and get a high draft pick, we know this team isn't going to do that. We know Joe Mazzulla is a competitor. We know Jaylen Brown is going to want to win, but also showcase what he can do without Jason Tatum, as this is effectively going to be his team for this season. And we know the rest of the guys on this roster, most of whom won a championship just a little more than a year ago. They're not going to roll over and just take a year of losing, and so I fully expect the Celtics to try and win, try and be competitive despite not having Tatum, and they do have the talent. They have one of the best coaching staffs in the league that they can still be good enough to miss the play-in and finish in the top 6. At number 7, this is where I have the Hawks. Call me a Hawks hater, I am just not as high on this team. Adding Porzingis doesn't move me. I think they will be marginally better than they were last year, but there is nothing about this Hawks team where I can say they are going to be exceptionally better than they were the last 3 seasons where they finished in the play-in and didn't make the playoffs the last 2 years. I like Jalen Johnson, I like Dyson Daniels. I would expect that both of those guys are going to get better heading into the season, but I'm not high on Trae Young. I think him being your number 1 option, the best player in your team, is only going to get you so far with his tendency to shoot you out of games and being an absolute liability on the defensive end. I also think this is going to be an interesting year. The longer this contract situation with Trae Young drags out, he's due for an extension. He has a player option for next year, which he could decline to become an unrestricted free agent this summer. And because it's being reported that the Hawks are potentially maybe a bit wary of offering him a max contract extension, you have to wonder how that's going to impact the psyche of Trae Young as the season goes on and how it will impact his play. So no, I don't think the Hawks are going to have a breakout year like a lot of analysts are predicting. I think they'll be slightly better than they were last year, but not by much. At number 8, this is where my bias is going to come in. I know I'll get a lot of heat for this one, except for maybe for my fellow Bulls fans, but this is where I have the Chicago Bulls. Yes, I'm biased, but I think the Bulls are going to be a lot better than most people think. Most media outlets have them finishing 12th in the East. Their over-under on the season is at 32.5. I know a lot of everyday NBA fans don't watch the Bulls, but people forget that this Bulls team was actually pretty good post All-Star break. Yes, it was a small sample size. Yes, it was March and April basketball. Yes, the Bulls bombed in the play against the Heat, but this was a team that finished this season 15-5 in their final 20 games. They finished top 10 on offense in that stretch. They played a style of basketball where, despite not always being as talented as their opponent, they used their youth and up-tempo style offense to their advantage to wear out their opponent by getting out and running on every possession. Josh Giddey and Kobe White were putting up all-star level numbers during that stretch. Modest Bucelis started making strides and coming into his own as a rookie. They more or less have the same roster coming back with the exception of the addition of Isaac Okoro. They're not going to be a good team. They're not going to be contending for anything, but they're a team that is hungry. They play hard, and in a weak Eastern Conference, the 8th seed for this team is achievable. At number 9, this is where I've got the Miami Heat. I don't really know what to make of the Heat and what they're doing. I mean, to be honest, the reason I have them lower than most is because I think eventually they're going to trade one of Tyler Hero or Bam Adebayo at some point this season. I like the trade they made for Norman Powell. I thought they got good value for him in that trade from the Clippers, but I still don't see it moving the needle much for them, and I see yet another play-in appearance for this team. At number 10, I've got the Toronto Raptors. This is a wild card team for me. Like, the Raptors could easily finish in the top 6, or they could fall outside of the play-in. A lot of it just depends on how well things fall into place for them. If everything goes right, Brandon Ingram comes back healthy, looking like the Ingram from a few years ago where he was an all-star, does Scotty Barnes recover from somewhat of a down season and gets back to his all-star level play, or even breaks out into being a top 15 player in the NBA? I don't see that being likely, but you never know. Do things go well for Quickly and RJ Barrett? How well do they mesh? Can they stay healthy for the whole season? Does Grady Dick make a jump? Does Colin Murray Boyles look better than expected coming into his rookie season? If everything goes well and falls into place, then yeah, this could be a pretty decent team. But I just really don't like the hodgepodge of a roster they've put together. I don't really get what they're doing in terms of their direction. I don't have much faith in this team beyond being a play-in team. At number 11, hate to say it, but this is where I've got the Pacers. They lost 2 of their key players from last year's final run. Of course, one being their franchise player, the heart of their offense, and Tyrese Halliburton, and of course, losing Miles Turner in free agency. They've still got Siakam, of course, but if I was a betting man, my guess is he's probably not going to be playing much this season in a gap year. I do think they'll be better than just being, one of the tanking teams sitting at the bottom of the East, because they still have these young guys, Mathurin, who's going to be playing in a contract year, Nembhard, Nesmith, guys who know what it takes to get to the finals. They're not just going to roll over and tank, but I still don't think they have enough to get themselves into the top 10 in the East. At number 12, I'm putting the Sixers here. Listen, I have zero faith in this team. I know a lot of fans, analysts, outlets, they don't have much faith in the Sixers as well, but I'm seeing most people putting the Sixers in the play-in territory, in large part because they expect Maxey to really take this team under his wings, even if Embiid and Paul George are half the players we normally expect of them. And then, of course, VJ Edgecombe, who is going to be a nice addition for them as well, a rookie that is going to be NBA ready. But I have zero expectations that Embiid and Paul George are going to be healthy, and even when they were available and playing last season, they did not look that great together. Embiid never looked right. His health still remains uncertain going into the season. Paul George, in my view, is effectively washed. So yeah, I don't see the Sixers being much better than what we saw from this team last year. And then, of course, the bottom 3 teams, the Nets, the Hornets, and Wizards, which honestly are pretty interchangeable at this point in terms of where they're going to finish. I guess if I had to take a selection, I'll put the Hornets 13, only because they have a slightly more promising roster than the Nets and Wizards do, and might actually try and win this season. The Nets and Wizards, I mean, they're going to be pretty bad teams, unwatchable teams that are going to be competing for that top draft pick this season. So it's anyone's guess who's going to finish at the bottom. I'll go Wizards 14th, Nets 15th. But anyway, those are my Eastern Conference standing predictions for this upcoming season. Let me know what your guys' predictions look like in the comments and where you agree or disagree. Let me know. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.